evening, everyone and commissioners. We are ready to call to order the regular meeting of the City of Santa Barbara Harbor Commission for January 19th. Angela, can you please do a roll call?
Commissioner Anderson?
Here.
And Commissioner Anderson is participating remotely. Commissioner Cohen?
Here.
Commissioner Hanrahan?
Here.
Commissioner McCray?
Here.
Commissioner Nelson?
Here.
Commissioner Stanowicz?
Here.
Chair Stedman?
Here.
Everybody's here. Thank you.
All right. Are there any changes to the agenda?
Chair Stedman, no changes tonight.
Excellent. I guess we can go to general public comment if there are any.
I do not have any speaker slips for general public comment, and I'm not seeing any hands raised online, but if anyone would like to speak, they can indicate that by clicking the raise hand icon. And still not seeing any.
Excellent. Let's go to subcommittee reports.
Sure. Subcommittee reports. Thank you, Chair Stedman. Yeah, we had actually the regular December meeting canceled. However, we did have a special meeting regarding rectifying a Brown Act issue, which we completed in mid-December. The cruise ship subcommittee met December 1st, and I believe Commissioner Hanrahan would like to speak on that.
I would. Thanks very much, Chair and Vice Chair. Welcome to Commissioner Cohen to the Harbor Commission. Very happy to have you aboard. And happy 2023 to everybody in attendance and all commissioners. Wanted to offer an update and a kind of a review of our subcommittee meeting on cruise ships that was held on December 1st at 12 o'clock in the waterfront classroom. It was a really great afternoon of civic engagement. I thought it was very well attended. We had approximately 50 members of the public that were with us that day, spilling out of the Marine classroom and out onto the back deck, and very amiable, upbeat group, supportive and complimentary. No shenanigans, nobody being rude, which was wonderful. Requests were made for a larger space to host the meeting moving forward, as well as a microphone. It was loud enough, it was challenging enough to project for everyone to hear, especially for those that were sitting outside. That might be something for us to look into. We had people present there, our very excellent staff from City Council, as well as the waterfront. People from Chamber of Commerce, County Supervisor Doss Williams' office was there, and 6 different nonprofits were in attendance making comment. Mike Wiltshire and Chris Bell provided an excellent synopsis of the cruise ship program, which kicked off the meeting, and then we moved into our first round of public comments. And if the commission doesn't mind, I'd just like to sample a few of those comments. It's my understanding that at our subcommittee meetings, that verbal public comment is not captured of its content. The person speaking will be in the minutes, but what they said is not captured and not on video, not written. So I took notes of everybody that spoke, and we each thanked them for presenting. And I thought that this evening, for those that weren't able to attend, I wanted to offer a couple of those comments for us to have a sense of what I think is the most important part of this process, and that is giving the public the opportunity to voice their concerns, their support, as well as their concerns for cruise ships, and for us to be providing them with information about cruise ships, the impacts on Santa Barbara. So without further ado, if I may share some of those public comment. The vast majority of comments were concerns over the cruise ship program. I'd say 95% to give it a percentage. Lee Heller, a prominent and much recognized local advocate for the environment, asked during her public comment for those present to raise their hand to display whether they were for or against cruise ships. And again, when that was done, the vast majority of people that raised their hands were speaking out in against the cruise ship program. We did have some strong advocates in favor of cruise ships. Jamie Dimon from Santa Barbara Landing very eloquently spoke about the support of cruise ships, as did James from Santa Barbara Dive, acknowledging the economic stimulus that cruise ships do bring to select number of businesses in Santa Barbara. Kate offered that artists on Sundays see no cruise ship buyers. Conrad Metzenberg acknowledged, again, the economic stimulus from cruise ships. Annie worried over tender emissions, the emissions from the tenders that come in. Ben Pitterly from Channel Keeper applauded the process and asked that we continue to be open and transparent as we continue the process. Rory, a 16-year resident, thinks cruise ships help bring people back to Santa Barbara after they visited on ships. Betsy was looking for an independent surveyor on economics, their economics report, the benefits of cruise ships to Santa Barbara. She didn't feel that Visit Santa Barbara was the right group to be conducting the economic survey. Sierra Club Santa Barbara said cruise ships are not compatible with Santa Barbara's environmental reputation. Kathy wondered if the $500,000 benefit from cruise ships, and that I believe she was referencing is the per passenger fee that is collected, questioning whether that has much of an impact in the $17 million waterfront budget. Katie from Das Williams' office advocated for change to cruise ship programs. Our special guest that afternoon was Tim Mitro from Santa Barbara Air Pollution Control District. He also gave an excellent testimony on the emission impacts from cruise ships, suggesting that cruise ships contribute significantly more pollution to our local community than cars arriving with tourists. He suggested that Santa Barbara is not in compliance with state requirements of NOx emissions, currently 150 times what we see from passenger cars. Lastly, I wanted to bring up the Sanctuary Advisory Council presented a letter of recommendation with specific recommendations for the commission to consider. And I would encourage my fellow commissioners to take a look at that letter once again. And I think that the letter, this letter, could serve as the basis for our decisions moving forward with regard to how to handle the cruise ship question. For those of you that aren't aware of what the Sanctuary Advisory Council is, they represent the general public, tourism, business, recreational fishing, commercial fishing, non-consumptive recreation, education, research, and conservation community interests, Chumash interests, as well as 10 local, state, and federal government agencies. And they wrote, the Advisory Council asked that the City of Santa Barbara be mindful that increased cruise ship traffic through the Santa Barbara Channel logically results in an increased risk of environmental impact to Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary resources. We recommend that the city carefully consider approaches that could both reduce the likelihood of potential impacts to those resources and potentially incentivize the advancement of the cruise industry towards less impactful practices and technologies. Such approaches may include, but not limited to, cap and/or reduce the existing number of annual visits, limit visitation to ships with advanced sewage treatment systems installed, and prohibit ships with Tier 2 marine sanitation devices, limit visitation to ships with best technologies, i.e. Tier 3 engines, plug-in technology, closed-loop scrubber technologies, incorporating shoreside hazardous waste disposal, etc., to minimize marine waste disposal, as well as greenhouse gas and other criteria, air pollutant emissions. They further recommend restricting visitation of ships with poor records of environmental compliance. They recommend the adoption of additional limitations to balance the city's economic interests with environmental considerations relevant to the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary. They further recommend to modify the city's voluntary 12-mile vessel speed reduction zone, requesting to require cooperation within the entire vicinity of the VSR zone to reduce nitrogen dioxide, the NOx emissions, and help bring Santa Barbara County into compliance with the California ambient air quality standards that we are currently not in compliance. Last two recommendations: to phase in the required use of at-anchor emissions control systems when such technologies become feasible, and the periodic review of the city's cruise ship policies to update measures based on evolving industry sustainable best practices. That concludes my summary from the subcommittee on cruise ships. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner Hanrahan. Commissioner Nelson, did you?
I have a
speak on
question. Do you envision bringing it back before the whole issue of the cruise ship program to the full commission at some time? Do you anticipate that occurring, or will you see this as a continuing forum that you're going to offer the community and the public?
I think that, and this would be something that we would discuss, of course, with the subcommittee, with Commissioners Stedman and Anderson, but I think that our mission continues to be the back and forth, the providing of information to the general public by scheduling speakers to come to our subcommittee meeting. Waterfront Director Wiltshire is in the process, he's working with staff to set up the next meeting to discuss ocean discharge regulations, enforcement, and current best practices. He also mentioned that they're working on getting a guest speaker from Cruise Line International, the Coast Guard, or another entity to describe how ships manage discharge in the channel, and also looking to work with Visit Santa Barbara to set up future meeting on economic benefits, perhaps one in the spring once that current survey is complete. So to answer your question, Commissioner Nelson, the goal is to continue with the subcommittee, encouraging the general public to come to receive information from speakers that we plan to invite, and to provide further public comment about their feelings, pro and con, about the cruise industry.
That's great, because if you were, I guess my request would be that I was totally impressed with the performance of the Air Pollution Control District. And their participation is a function of the questions that we ask. And so, for example, it became at least clear to me, a layman, not a scientist, that it's the emissions impact is greatest when these cruise ships are operating at 12, 14 knots and are out in the channel. That when they're anchored, that impact is far, far less. So, for example, I would say, well, if all of those ships are going to blow by anyway, and they're going to be making the greatest contribution, environmental contribution anyway, why should the minimal impact, what is the impact of these ships while mooring in relationship or compared to the impact they're going to have anyway if they're continuing to LA or San Francisco or something like that. So it's just, I was very impressed with that, but I got the feeling that they weren't asked enough questions. And so if we ever do have it, I would hope we would invite them to join us for the discussion, since air emissions seems to be one of the principal focuses of the community. So thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Does any other commissioner have anything regarding a subcommittee report to present?
I do. We didn't have a meeting of the Commercial Fisheries Subcommittee, but we have what can only be characterized as a breakthrough. Dr. Selko of CFSB was in conversation with a trustee at the Santa Barbara City College over the holidays, and discussed one of the big priorities of the Commercial Fisheries Subcommittee, which was a facility for gear, boat, and cold storage. And the discussion continued to the point where the trustee said, well, you know, maybe we could make a portion of parking lot 3 available for that purpose. And if anybody's familiar with the layout of their parking, directly across from the harbor parking is parking lot 3. There's a lot of roller skating going on there now. I believe the waterfront department uses it for overflow during the summer. But nonetheless, she then, in fact, took that idea to the superintendent, the interim superintendent of the city college, and who also thought that was a great idea and immediately saw a connection between workforce development and career education and what we were trying to accomplish. So suddenly it became not more than just a parking lot where there was going to be an exchange of spots for cars or spots for boats. And that continued. Kim also was able to have a conversation with the city administrator and the waterfront director. And she committed herself to trying to make it happen and trying to identify a space. And in fact, the City College space was one of those recommended. Today at 4 o'clock, there was a presentation by CFSB to the Board of Trustees, which went famously. I was there and spoke and gave the history of the Commercial Fisheries Subcommittee, and they have approved it and have basically agreed to form sort of a working group to look at it, to look at what are the consequences, what are the environmental issues, what are the permit issues. But for the first time since the Commercial Fisheries Subcommittee was created, I guess in early 2019, there has been real progress, and I'm really excited. I'm really excited about that because those of you, now there's 3 of us who've been on this commission long enough to know, the City Council asked the Harbor Commission to create a subcommittee to address 2 issues. One of those issues was that the zoning that had been established to accommodate, if you will, coastal dependent uses to implement the Coastal Act was not working. That was issue number 1. Issue number 2 was the fact that for 30 years, the commercial fishing community's desire for more storage space had gone unanswered. In fact, it was actually a recommendation in the Old Harbor Master Plan as one of its priorities. So with that charge, the Waterfront Department began to work on the issue. As some of you will remember, during the height of the pandemic, we went back to the City Council and we sought direction from them on where to go with this search for property. They not only supported the continuing search for property, but they said, if you'll lead the charge, CFSB, we'll partner with you to get the grants necessary to perhaps acquire property or to develop it. And in fact, assigned 2 city council members to the committee as a liaison to make sure that that happened. Well, the meeting today essentially is an indication that it could happen, and there's excitement about making it happen. We had letters from the County Board of Supervisors that were presented there. There were letters from Assemblymember Hart and letters from the 2 liaisons to the Commercial Fisheries Subcommittee, Councilmember Jordan and Friedman. So today was a big day for the scope and task presented to the Commercial Fisheries Subcommittee. It's great to see Kim and Chris in the audience, and as a consequence, I'm going to request, I've touched base with the 2 other members on my the subcommittee, and we would like to ask the Waterfront Department to schedule a meeting of the Commercial Fishing Subcommittee as soon as possible to address 2 things. 1, the progress that's being made on the gear, boat, and cold storage yard at City College, and 2, an analysis and some work the fishing community and CFSB have done on the issue of discounted slips. There's been a lot of good information that's been uncovered, and as I recall, the meeting of the Slip Transfer Committee that we had, Director Wiltshire threw down a challenge, give us some facts, give us some information. And I know that the board members of CFSB and others outside of the board have met, have discussed this, and would like to make a presentation to the subcommittee. So for the reasons, those two reasons, the progress that we're making on the Gearboat and cold storage yard, and two, progress or a further discussion of the discounted slips, we'd like to have another meeting of the Commercial Fisheries Subcommittee. That's all I have.
Great, thank you, Commissioner Nelson. Also, Commissioner Handerkin, are you on the queue?
Thank you, Vice Chair. My apologies, I've neglected to announce the next meeting scheduled for the Cruise Ship Subcommittee. It tentatively scheduled for February 22nd. That's a Wednesday at 12 p.m., again in the Waterfront Classroom. So again, that's February 22nd at 12 p.m. in the Waterfront Classroom. That's the date that we're currently looking at for our next subcommittee meeting. And again, I'd like to encourage the remainder of the commission to please take a look over the Sanctuary Advisory Council letter, take a look at those recommendations. I'd like to get it into our agenda at our next Harbor Commission meeting to discuss that in detail, that letter. The letter from SAC, and considering a letter to City Council in support of adopting those, but not until then.
Oh, yep. Commissioner, Chair Stedman. Yep.
Thanks. Commissioner Hanrahan, so that's what occurred to me during your first, briefing, that, an advisory letter, I think, would be appropriate. So I wanted to ask Director Wiltshire, what kind of process do you want for that if we actually want to create an advisory letter?
Yeah, Chair Stedman, just, in my opinion, would be just by way of process, the subcommittee does work to inform the Harbor Commission. So as you make it through these meetings as a subcommittee, you gather information. At some point, we bring that back to the full Harbor Commission for the Harbor Commission to decide on an action. That would be the appropriate way. A subcommittee itself isn't even necessarily a decision-making body. They're just gathering information to report to your fellow Harbor Commissioners. So a decision to write a letter to council on what that content would ideally be weighed in by all the Harbor Commissioners.
That's good.
Great. Okay, yep, I think we're all, Commissioner McCray, yes.
I just wanted to reach back on the public comment. So if you've got other things with respect to subcommittee reports, please go forward. Not hearing any more. We had a written public comment, and I wanted to find out if what is alleged to have happened actually did happen, that they weren't able to get on the regular public lists. Is that true? Is that likely to happen? Waiting on the slip, waiting for a slip, the slip bus.
Commissioner McCray, are you referring to the letter that was received about yesterday?
That's correct.
Yeah, we're still evaluating that. I'm not necessarily sure what it is even kind of, it's insinuating, and so we're trying to figure out what that is. We do have a wait list, and so that was sent to you just because it was addressed to you. So ideally, staff could have a little more time to look into that and address the person who wrote it to us.
Great, thank you very much. That's kind of what I was thinking, that it seemed unrealistic what was being suggested had actually happened.
Yeah, Commissioner McCray, it was pretty new to us, so ideally we have a little bit more time to kind of process it administratively and get to the bottom of what it was requesting.
Great. Good. I think you're back to the consent calendar now. Great.
Right. Unless there are any further comments or questions. All right. Let me, perfect. All right, let's return to the consent calendar. Would you like to read item number 1, please, Angela?
Item number 1, approval of the minutes. Recommendation that Harbor Commission waive further reading and approve the minutes from the regular meeting of November 17th, 2022, and the special meeting of December 15th, 2022.
Very well. So Unfortunately, I think we're not going to be able to do the push-button voting, commissioners, which would have been the really cool thing, right? Because we have one commissioner who's zooming in. So Angela, can you, I guess,
So moved.
thank you. I second that. Can you please take a roll call vote?
Commissioner Anderson,
Agreed.
Commissioner Cohen,
Agree.
Commissioner Hanrahan,
Yes.
Commissioner McCray,
Yes.
Commissioner Nelson,
Yes?
Commissioner Stanowick,
Yes.
Chair Stedman.
Yes.
That's unanimous. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Let's move on to Harbor Commission matters, item number 2. Angela, would you like to, would you like to read that, please?
Item number 2, appointment of Suzanne Cohen to the Harbor Commission. Recommendation that Harbor Commission welcome new Harbor Commissioner Suzanne Cohen, whose term started January 1st, 2023 and expires on December 31st, 2026.
Welcome, welcome, welcome aboard. Yo. Thank you for your service.
Did you want to say something, Mike, first?
No, just staff would like to welcome Ms. Cohen as well. We had the opportunity to meet with Commissioner Cohen last week, I believe it was, and so kind of got her some of the introductory materials, had a really great meeting, and just, yeah, happy to have you on the commission, and would love it if you had a moment to speak about yourself and
Sure.
introduce yourself.
Happy to. Thanks, Mike. I wanted to also thank Eric, Brian, and Caesar. It was great to spend time with you last week and just learn about all the important work that you're doing in the harbor and just get familiar with how the logistics work. Caesar gave me a nice tour, which was really great, too. Let's see. My background, most of you probably have seen me here on behalf of Santa Barbara Adventure Company, but what you probably don't know, or maybe some of you do, is that a lot of my background is actually in real estate and commercial real estate. So I'm happy to share any of those skills that I can with the community and with the commission. I also have some experience with finance and capital improvements. I've successfully navigated the city planning department 2 times on large construction projects, so no small feat. The harbor has always been a special place for my family. My husband actually proposed to me at the breakwall, which was kind of nice. He reminded me of that the other day. We also built our family business using a business permit within the harbor, which, as you know, is really a key part of my life. And then also my kids have grown up kayaking in the marina and hanging out on the beach there, so we have a lot of connections personally to the harbor. My desire to serve on this commission is rooted in the community's wishes to maintain and expand our city's accessibility and to help ensure that the values of our community are represented within the harbor, which I'm sure all of you share that same common goal. I'd like to quickly just acknowledge Betsy Kramer, the commissioner whose space I am now in, and her incredible dedication to this body. It's pretty hard to believe, but she spent 16 years representing, the community in the harbor, and that's an incredible amount of community service by any standard. So I hope that maybe she's watching or she hears, but I really commend that effort. So I look forward to meeting all of you. If anyone wants to know more, please feel free to reach out. But it's been great to be welcomed by the staff and have such a great briefing of what's happening in the harbor. I know you guys have had your hands full with all of the work that's been happening these last 2 weeks, and watching how you've handled and navigated all of the storm and the weather impacts has been really inspirational. So thank you. I look forward to getting to know all of you more.
Excellent. Are there any comments for our new commissioner?
Welcome. So great to have you. And I also wanted to, that was very nice of you to recognize Betsy because, 16 years on the Harbor Commission, that is truly a tribute to her civic connection. So thank you, Betsy, assuming you might be tuning in. Probably are. You can't leave so easily. Wonderful to have worked with you, and thank you for your service to the city. And thanks again. Welcome, Suzanne.
And I'm delighted to have someone with an expertise as well as an interest in real estate. One of our subcommittees, the slip transfer subcommittee, in fact, sort of made a recommendation, but then sort of stalled out, trying to figure out a way of doing a market valuation of the slip transfer or the slip transfer right. So that still is an issue that needs some attention, and it's great that you're here to perhaps help give it to it.
Yeah, I just want to also say welcome, and also thank you for all the public comments that you've given. I know that is really helpful to us, and it really shapes our perspective. So it's always great when we have a commissioner who's interested in the Harbor Commission and is willing to voice their opinion. So thank you.
I'm just clearing my screen up here. All right, well, thank you, my fellow commissioners. It's evenings like this that make me proud to serve. Okay, let's move on to new business. Item number 3, Angela.
Item number 3, Santa Barbara Maritime Museum Coffee Shop Renovation Update. Recommendation that Harbor Commission receive an update from staff on the status of the Santa Barbara Maritime Museum's coffee shop renovation project.
All right, Chair Stedman and Commissioners, I'll be handling this item. Should be fairly brief, but back in the November meeting, we touched on this briefly, and there was a request to provide a little bit more of an in-depth update on the Maritime Museum's plans to convert some of their space into a coffee shop. So I have a few slides here to kind of shed some light on what they're doing. Next slide. So very wordy, but in short, so the Maritime Museum reached out to the Waterfront Department about a year ago with the idea of converting a portion of their small gift shop into a small coffee bar. So the proposed project that they brought to us would lie completely within their existing lease space, and they would still continue to maintain some gift shop space as well. The proposed use is already included and available in their existing lease language, so it wouldn't require any lease modifications or changes. It is something that is acceptable within their lease terms. And the Maritime Museum is now at the point where they're currently working with an architect to lay out plans and obtain a building permit with the City of Santa Barbara. And then once they get through that, they can figure out what they're going to do to construct. Per their lease, so to shine a little light on the lease terms, their current lease terms would inevitably result in an increase in revenue for the Waterfront Department. So for sales like this, sales at their coffee shop, the lease terms call out for 10% of gross sales. So we do, as the Waterfront, we would anticipate an increase in revenue from this modification. Next slide. Just a quick photo from the outside of the Maritime Museum to give a little perspective on where this renovation would be occurring. So on the left side of the photo there is the Maritime Museum's current gift shop on the lower level and their patio as well. So the renovations would be contained completely within that space. There would be no significant exterior modifications. That would be the entrance door to what they're planning to be the small coffee bar and coffee shop. Next slide. And this is my last slide, a little hard to discern, but the intent with this was just to show that they're moving forward with plans. This was a schematic that was pulled from their proposed plans to building and safety. Really what it shows is that the space will include a small service counter, a point of sale equipment, preparation area, refrigerator, and some other necessary appliances that you'd find in a small coffee shop. Some notes is the project will require a full permit. They're on the hook to go through that. This will require to meet all ADA requirements, plumbing code, everything that is required through a building permit. It will be on the hook with this project. It's anticipated that the museum will receive a permit within 4 to 6 weeks. So they're kind of moving through the building and safety process now. Once the permit's obtained, they'll work with a contractor to complete the construction. I don't have an exact date from them, but my anticipation for a project of this scale would take kind of 3 to 6 months to build out. And so they'll figure out what timing works best for their operation and consult with the waterfront as to when they want to complete that construction. With that, that's my update on the Maritime Museum Coffee Shop, so I'll take any questions or public comment on this item.
Commissioner Hanrahan?
Thank you, Manager Wiltshire. Quick question, how does will the facade of the building change at all in that space?
No, Commissioner Hanrahan, no exterior changes. It is a historic building, so that would kind of open up a whole new can of worms. So beyond signage, I believe there'll be no exterior modifications to the building.
Thank you.
Commissioner Cohen?
Have any of the other tenants voiced any concerns having competition from a, another restaurant in the harbor? And then also, when did they start this process? I'm just curious, because if they're getting a permit in 3 weeks, they must have been working on it for the last 6 months. So,
Yeah, Commissioner Cohen, they approached the Waterfront Department about a year ago. We did have this in a business report on a previous Harbor Commission item, so it was kind of brought to the group for attention. There's really no Harbor Commission action on it because it's within their lease terms. It's something they can do, so it's really just a construction project. To your question, yes, there were. The owners of Brophy Brothers did reach out with a concern about a competing interest. This project went to Planning Commission a month or two ago, and they wrote a letter to Planning Commission. Planning Commission still unanimously approved the change of use on the project. Mr. Barrios and myself have since met with Brophy Brothers and kind of talked about what was going on there, and we as the waterfront don't see a major impact. There isn't really a purveyor in the harbor that is known for coffee per se. I mean, Brophy Brothers does serve coffee at On the Alley. The Harbor Market does serve coffee, but I wouldn't say that they're, when you say Brophy Brothers, you don't think coffee shop. So from the waterfront's point of view, we didn't think there was too much of a conflict there. The hope is that it kind of grows the pie and brings more business down there and doesn't just sort of dissect the business that's already there. And so that's really what we were kind of looking at. And the real thing is it's in their lease. They're kind of allowed to do this. It's a service that is allowable within the terms of their lease, which was agreed upon years and years ago. So it's kind of hard to stand in the way of that.
Commissioner Nelson?
Is the 10% of gross part of their original lease?
Yes, Commissioner Nelson, it is.
And so that was for all the books they sold in the gift shop, that sort of thing?
Yes, I believe it was for retail sales out of
Yeah.
that space.
Do we do the same thing with other nonprofits in the harbor, like the Ty Warner Center or that? Do they pay a percentage of gross do they sell like books or T-shirts and stuff like that? Do they have a similar requirement in their lease? Just curious.
I'm not sure offhand. Mr. Wood, do you know the Sea Center's lease agreement?
Chair Stedman, Commissioner Nelson, that is correct. They have a similar structure.
They do. That's great. Thank you.
Commissioner Cohen?
just a follow-up question, because you were saying that it's in their lease. Is there, I mean, I assume that there are parameters in terms of, them having to ask for permission in order to make modifications, or could they just make it into a restaurant if they wanted to?
No, Commissioner Cohen, good question. No, the lease agreements that we have with our tenants very strictly kind of define the business that they could do. And so there is a provision in their lease to serve kind of food and drinks of this nature, but not a sit-down restaurant, not a lunch restaurant, that sort of thing. So if it were to be outside the confines of their lease, that would be something that we'd have to bring back ultimately to Harbor Commission and to council to make a lease amendment and change the terms of a lease. But in this case, we don't need to do that.
Okay, if there aren't any other questions from my fellow commissioners. All right, Angela, any public comment?
I don't have any speaker slips, and I also don't see any hands raised at this time.
All right, very well. Let's move right on to the next item, Director Wiltshire.
All right, this one will be Mr. Barrios with the mid-year budget report.
Good evening, Chair Stedman, Commissioners, and members of the public. My name is Cesar Barrios. I'm the Waterfront Business Manager, and today I will provide a brief mid-year report of fiscal year 2023, which ended December 31st of 2022. Jumping into our mid-year revenues, I'm happy to report that our revenues are up 13% compared to last year at the same time. As you can see in this table, the property management program is tracking nearly 17% higher than last year at the same time. Commercial leases are up 5.36%, equivalent to $66,131 versus last year. Food services leases are up 8.53%, again versus last year. The financial management program consists of interest earned on the department reserves, and these figures are provided by the finance department, so we have no control over those numbers. The interest revenue at mid-year is up 81% compared to last year at the same time. Primarily, this is due to budgeting and also the waterfront department assisting the restaurants with the COVID-19 loans. Moving on, parking services revenue program has seen a significant improvement in the first half of the fiscal year. This revenue is up 26%, or $457,847 over the last year at the same time. Through mid-year, all waterfront parking lots show an increase over the last year at the same time. So we're seeing an increase overall in occupancy as well as the revenues. In marina management, revenue is up 2.8%, equivalent to $108,400 over last year. Slip permit transfer fees remain strong, up 5.6% when compared to last year at the same time. And a total of 50 slip transfers took place in the first half of the year.
Excuse me, is there a slide for that, Cesar?
No, let's see. Not for that one. I think I have, let me see, let me check here. Chair Stem, we do not have a slide for that. It was included in the report.
Okay, thanks.
Chair Stedman, I think it's all rolled up into the marina management revenues, so slip transfer fees and all marina related. So this is just sort of a higher level.
Okay, that was actually my question. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's see, where was I? So liveaboard fees and visitor fees are down 6.48% and 18.19% respectively. Although the waterfront is still a desirable location for boaters up and down the coast, the decrease in numbers can be attributed to a number of factors, including the consistent foul weather since October, as well as the onset of a possible economic recession. So we're seeing a slowdown in that regard. Let's see, expenditures, oops, I think I jumped in. Okay, moving on to revenue projections. The department is projecting to end the fiscal year slightly ahead of budgeted revenues. Although mid-year revenues are promising, we think a cautiously optimistic approach is best due to unknowns in the economy related to the existing inflation and a potential recession, as I previously mentioned. On that regard, the property management program is expected to finish the year slightly above budgeted revenue expectations of 1.1%. Harbor and wharf food service revenues are expected to continue to improve and account for the majority of the program revenues. The financial management program consists of interest earned on the department's reserves. Interest revenue is behind budget revenue projections and it is projected to finish the year approximately $5,700 below estimated budget projections. However, this number will, let's see, yeah, the number will vary depending on the reserve balances and interest rates. Parking services is estimated to exceed budget revenue estimates, although recent rainstorms have impacted parking revenues. Heading into what is generally regarded as a parking slow season adds to the department's conservative approach with parking revenue projections. And you may recall in previous years, January and February, for example, we've had 80-degree weather, which it definitely has impacts on our revenues as we project for the next quarter. Marina management is also expected to come in close to budgeted revenue estimates, although mid-year revenues in the marina management program had been kept afloat by strong slip transfer fees at nearly 6% above than last year at the same time. We had a total of, as I mentioned, 50 transfers that took place the first half of the year. So moving on to expenditures, and here you can see a little more detail in big picture. This slide shows the mid-year actual expenditures at $9,863,460, or 51% of the annual budget, and that includes the encumbrances of $860,382. The debt service payments are front-loaded at 72%. That's $1,467,316 of principal and interest being paid in the first half of the fiscal year, causing the department to show overall expenditures slightly below 44%, as opposed to the 50% halfway through the fiscal year that we generally expect. And these are due date driven. We make payments this time of the year. To point another item here, salaries and benefits are slightly below budgeted expenditures at mid-year point. The savings are the result of the positions being held vacant, including the water from business manager, facilities maintenance workers, as well as numerous hourly positions. As of December 31st, 2022, the department is on track to stay below its budgeted expenditures, and the department is projecting over $850,365 in expenditure savings at year end. However, with the recent events related to the January storm, the damage to land and infrastructure, these numbers are likely going to change. Okay, so this table shows water from the department expenditures by program through December 31st, 2022. The table does not include the current encumbrances totaling $860,382 that you saw in the previous slides, which are funds that were promised by entering into contracts at the beginning of the fiscal year, but actually are expended throughout the year. All water from department programs areas are at or under proposed budget expenditures. And mid-year, except facilities design and capital programs, which is 7.85 above the budget expenditures. This is due to the debt service payments that are front-loaded at the first half of the fiscal year, thus slightly skewing the numbers at mid-year report. Overall, all anticipated water from department programs will be under proposed budget expenditures at the conclusion of fiscal year 2023. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Vice Chair?
Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Vargas. I have a question just regarding, I know you said obviously the numbers are going to change, especially with the expenditures regarding the January storm. You know, it came to our attention with the emergency dredging. I know we'll talk about the dredge later on, but the weekly cost of the dredge is pretty substantial. is that going to come out of the waterfront budget and, or reserves? I'm just kind of wondering where that's going to come from.
Chair Stedman, Commissioner Stanwyck, no, that's funded by federal funds, and Mr. Wilshire can correct me if that's not accurate.
Yeah, no, Chair Stanwyck, or Commissioner Stanwyck, we have presidential budgetary funds for dredging each year. We have that budget that they kind of decide on, and we try and lobby and influence that to make sure we have enough to do what we do. This emergency dredging will come out of that budget, so it'll be funded out of that pot of money. As we get into our other dredge cycles and they award that bid, if there isn't enough there, then we will go to the Army Corps and lobby the federal government to say, hey, we incurred these additional costs. And so the short answer is we fully anticipate that to be covered by federal funds.
Okay, great, thanks.
Commissioner Hanrahan?
Thank you, Chair. Following up on the previous question, Mr. Vargas, can you speak to some of the recent and unexpected costs that the harbor and waterfront are facing in light of the recent storms? Just nothing, I'm just curious to know what sorts of things are we having to fix, having to repair, and what are those costs coming up? And I guess, kind of furthering, are we beginning, maybe we already have established, but do we have a reserve fund for when, 10 days of storms destroys the coast and we're faced with unprecedented damage? Are we building that into our budget? I suspect we are, but just curious. Thank you.
Yeah, Commissioner Hanrahan, there'll be significant costs with this. From a budget point of view and mid-year point of view, I kind of see this as completely separate. So this is an emergency. So this is exactly what our reserves are for. What is happening right now is the waterfront is, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in the storm update, but in short, the waterfront is fitting the bill for a lot of this. So rock revetment, huge amounts of cleanup, some damage to Stearns Wharf, all this stuff that's happening kind of north of $1 million at this point in kind of encumbered costs that we anticipate we'll spend. We're tracking all that. There is a potential, a likelihood, a maybe that we can receive federal funding or state funding or relief funding because this was considered a state of emergency, both statewide in the county of Santa Barbara and in the city of Santa Barbara. So we're going to do everything we can to essentially bring that money back into the waterfront budget. But as usual, you need to pay for that in advance, and then it's months, years, however long it is to sort of attempt to recoup some of those dollars. So that's the position we're at right now. But we almost look at that as a separate pot of money. This is all our operational budget, and when something like this happens, you kind of utilize your reserves for what they're there for, and then kind of figure out the administrative part of it later.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Just a thought, maybe moving forward, acknowledging what appears to be a forecast of problems with increase in storms and climate impacts, that perhaps instead of reaching into our reserves moving forward, we may need to start to allocate a dedicated unanticipated storm fund. Yeah, just thinking out loud. Thank you for your great response.
Commissioner Nelson?
It's just what I read in the newspaper, so I don't know how accurate it is, but I understand that there was our category of emergency, the emergency declaration was different and represented a more severe impact than other areas that had the disaster declaration. And that because we were in the higher tier of impact, we could anticipate and expect cash. That it wasn't the sort of thing where you'd have to wait 2 years, that because we fell into this special category, that we would be eligible to receive funding sooner than later. Are we engaged in whoever is dealing with that at the city level on
Yeah.
what we can, because clearly, we should be eligible, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, Commissioner Nelson, good point. We are fully engaged. So the city's emergency services manager is sort of the point for all of this. They're working with fire department, public works, us, consolidating all of these initial damage assessments. I can speak from experience after going through the Thomas fire. There's no free lunch. This stuff comes with a lot of paperwork and a lot of administrative process. But we're not only engaged as a waterfront as an entity, but the city of Santa Barbara is sort of coalescing together to make sure that we're getting what we can and pushing that paperwork forward to make sure that we can get the dollars we need.
Does emergency services do that paperwork? And if so, if they expect you to do the paperwork?
We've been we're kind of a week out of it. We've been so fixated on
Okay.
operationally handling this
Okay.
that we are sort of tracking it on our side and working with our emergency services manager as a consolidator. She's very in the know with federal funding, this sort of thing, so we're relying on her as a resource. And right now, we're sort of making sure the work gets done, and then we can get to the money part after.
Vice Chair?
Yes. I'm just looking at the Waterfront Department revenue line item sheet that was included in the report. Thank you for providing that. For analytical people like myself, it's very helpful. The one thing that stood out to me that I find odd was the line for visitor fees. I noticed that, it's a big part of the annual budget, and it was one of the items that's down like 20%. And I remember, I think it was about a year or two ago, as part of the budget, we recommended an increase in the visitor fees from, I think, $1 a foot to $1.50 a foot. And I'm in the harbor all the time, and I see very little vacancies. I'm just wondering if there's a reason for that line item being down so much for fiscal year 2022.
Commissioner Stanwyck, good question. Talking to our accounting and billing folks that track all these trends, my understanding is that we're just having, because of the state of the economy, we're getting less visitors in general, which is a function also of inflation and all the aspects of the economy at the moment. And besides that, I can look further and let you know, following this meeting. But at this time, that's my understanding.
Okay.
And Commissioner Stan, just to add on to that, comparing to the COVID year is really unique. There was just so much boating activity. You look at campsites and people in RVs and all this activity. So I don't think it's that our numbers are necessarily low now. We were just comparing, the previous year was so kind of astronomically high, and there was just a lot of people and a lot of boating activity. So I think we're comparing it to a pretty unique year last year.
All right. Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, there are no other speakers, any public hands raised?
I don't have any hands raised or speaker slips at this time.
All right. Very well, thank you very much, Manager Barrios.
You're welcome.
That's a tough report to deliver. So you did great.
Thank you.
All right, can we move on to item number 5, please?
Item number 5, emergency construction of rock rivetment. Recommendation that Harbor Commission receive and review an update on the construction of an emergency rock rivetment in response to the recent severe storm damage.
Chair Stedman, Commissioners, I'll be taking this one, but I want to preface that with, we have our facilities manager, Brian Adair, who's been kind of boots on the ground through all of this, so I'll give the report, but he's got a very hands-on eye for what's going on out there. And just a little bit of clarification, the next 2 items are sort of combined. The reason that I separated this emergency construction of rock revetment is because we applied for an emergency coastal development permit with the Coastal Commission and the Army Corps. And one of the stipulations of that permit was to essentially have this itemized on its own in a public meeting such as Harbor Commission. So this is part administrative, but it'll kind of bleed right into our whole storm update. And so, but I will give a little bit of an update on the construction of the rock revetment itself. Next slide. So a little tough to see on the photo, but this is sort of a before and after photo with the pre-storm berm construction, and then just a real look at the inundation after the storm. And just to note, the there's been a lot going on in the last couple of weeks. The rain event and the huge amount of rain in the city was not really an issue at the waterfront. What was really the issue was the storm, or the swell, this historic swell that occurred on January 5th and January 6th. So while the rest of the city was dealing with this massive amount of rain and flooding issues due to rain, our issues really occurred when it was bright and sunny and just the swell was at its peak. The kind of epicenter of it was the Thursday night between January 5th and January 6th, where the swell kind of peaked and it coincided with a high tide. And so a lot of this occurred in the cloak of darkness in the middle of night. A huge amount of sand was stripped off the entire coast up and down California, but in our kind of local frontage as well. So you look at Ledbetter, prior to this photo, even the evening before at 8 o'clock on Thursday, that berm was there. I was standing on it. There was 50 feet of beach. Came back at 7 o'clock the next morning. Not only was all that sand gone, but we'd lost a significant amount of infrastructure. The yacht club storage parking lot. You can kind of see it on the left side of the left photo where the yacht club stores all those sailboats. Luckily, they moved those sailboats, but sort of half of that parking lot was eroded and given back to the sea. Harbor Marine Works parking lot and fencing was eroded, and same with our maintenance yard. So just pretty significant damage in a really short period of time. Next slide. So here's a photo the morning after, kind of capturing some of that damage. That asphalt and parking lot sort of extended another 8 or 10 feet out into the ocean. There was a fence that ran the whole length of that, and so it got pretty devastated pretty quickly. What we realized as well is that was sort of a focal point for wave action, and it's happened in the past, and when a storm of similar magnitude happened in the 80s, there was no rock revetment wall in front of the yacht club. Since then, there has been one, but they only made it to about halfway down the yacht club parking lot. And so right where that rock wall ended sort of acted as this funnel, and wave activity during the high tide was, waves were surging through the yacht club parking lot and all the way down and through Harbor, Maine. So we had somebody kind of stationed on those storm drains 24 hours through the night, making sure they were clear. It became really clear that a huge amount of water was coming through there. Next slide. So in fairly short order, we deemed this little segment of coast our worst hit segment of coast. Submitted for an emergency permit with the Army Corps and Coastal Commission to do something. We needed to fortify that. Even on a high tide with no swell, there was severe erosion, continued erosion. It was pretty clear that there was really no defense there anymore, and that water was going to continually erode that infrastructure. In the short term, we had Cushman Contracting just essentially building a sand berm up in front of it daily. That sand berm would get taken away by the tide every night, but it did its purpose. It kind of prevented further erosion of infrastructure. And so we submitted a permit to essentially continue that rock revetment wall that you see in front of the yacht club parking lot, continue that same profile and mimic it all the way down and wrapping into and around the waterfront maintenance yard. So sort of finalize the project and protect that section of the harbor. And again, it's interesting, that rock wall in front of the yacht club parking lot, if you look at pictures from the day before, it just looks like a sand berm dune. Those rocks were not exposed, and it was really the storm activity that exposed all of those rocks. Next slide. As of last week, Cushman Contracting's been on site, lots of rock moving, lots of heavy equipment. Constructing the revetment wall. These are very, very specific rocks. We've gotten a lot of questions. Hey, can we use the debris flow? Can we use all the rocks that are in Montecito? They're really not appropriate for this instance. They're sandstone boulders that are coming out of Montecito, so they would just eventually turn to sand. They're round, and so they don't kind of angularly lock together. So this is a very specific stone, and it does mimic the type of rock that was utilized in front of the yacht club decades ago. As mentioned before, the funding for this project is currently coming out of the waterfront budget, but it's anticipated that we could be successful in recouping some of that through federal or state reimbursement funds. So that's where a lot of our effort is focused right now, to make sure that we are in line to receive that funding as needed. Cushman is expected to complete this portion of it, the rock revetment, within the next couple weeks. They're moving very quickly. We're lucky right now, lucky in the sense that we have king tides, but with the high tides comes an extremely low tide, and so the low tide allows them to get down to the level they need to build that rock wall up the way it needs to be. So fairly short order, but within the next couple weeks they should have that in place. And the intent is not to expand or encroach on any additional space. It's really just taking the line of what was lost and sort of recouping that space and rebuilding it to what it was prior to the storm. So with that, I'll pass it over to Mr. Engebretson to kind of give a bigger debrief on the whole storm, but I'm happy to answer any questions now specifically on that rock revetment if the commission or public has any.
Vice Chair?
Yes, my question is there a plan in place for if we cannot get reimbursed from federal or state aid for the 1.2 million?
Good question, Commissioner Stanhook. My hope is that we do get reimbursed. We do have sufficient funds in our reserves at this point to cover this where the cost of this revetment is at now. We'll exhaust all options to try and regain that. This is truly an emergency repair. It was a pretty unique scenario, and so although it is why we're reserved, it would be really nice to get some support from the state and the feds, and so I think that's where all of our energy is going, but the backstop would essentially be the waterfront budget.
Great, thanks.
Commissioner Hanrahan?
Thank you, Chair. Director Wiltshire, the rock revetment is a temporary fix then?
Commissioner Hanrahan, not necessarily. And so we submit, during an emergency, we submit for a permit with the Coastal Commission and the Army Corps for a year-long permit. Their expectation of us is to revisit this a year from now and apply for a permanent permit. And so we have a civil engineer on site. We're mimicking the previous design. There was a past design that never got enacted to essentially do this exact project we're doing now. So yes and no is the answer, and that it is a year-long permit, but essentially we're hoping that we can revisit this in the future and prove the case that that is a very critical piece of infrastructure. In the absence of that rock revetment, there will just be somewhat unlimited inundation of tides, even on a minimal swell. So we'll be back at it a year from now, submitting all of the environmental reviews and the permit process with the Coastal Commission.
Thank you. Would it be possible for us to receive a presentation from a city engineer or someone who can speak to the commission and help us to better understand what our options are moving forward to better protect the coastline from what is likely to not be the last time that we anticipate such storm, such swell? It just seems that we're taking the necessary steps. We're making sure that no further incursion happens, but are we looking for what happens next year or in 3 years or 5 years down the line? And I'm sure we are, but I don't know that this commission has been informed on what that plan is.
Again, good question, Commissioner Hanrahan. I think a great place to start is the city's sea level rise adaptation plan. So a huge amount of work went into that. Commissioner Kramer was a Harbor Commission representative. That was presented to Harbor Commission maybe a couple years ago. So the city does have a very detailed plan, adaptation plan, calling out high-risk areas, calling out Stearns Wharf, calling out plans for the waterfront. And so as of now, that is the city's sort of long-range planning document for the exact questions you're asking about. And so I'd be happy to forward the link to that sea level rise adaptation plan. It's available on the city's website. You can kind of dig in as deep as you want into that, and if there's any questions after that, I think we could definitely fill those gaps. But the waterfront is front and center in that report, and there's a lot of detailed analysis.
Thank you. And again, my understanding is that Betsy, seeing as she's no longer on the commission, we no longer have a representative from the commission who's attending those sea level adaptation meetings?
Commissioner Hanrahan and Chair Stedman, the sea level rise subcommittee was a broader subcommittee citywide, its goal was to develop this sea level rise adaptation plan. Since that work task has been completed, they dissolved that subcommittee.
Gotcha. Okay, thanks again.
Commissioner Nelson?
Piggybacking on Commissioner Hanrahan's questions, is the sea level rise study the right document to use or the right thing to use? I mean, we've had atmospheric rivers for what, the last 3 years, and we've had cyclone bombs. So, I mean, I don't know if the sea level rise report addressed an annual attack of atmospheric rivers and cyclone bombs, because if it didn't, it doesn't really prepare us for what you're asking for.
Commissioner Nelson, to speak solely for the waterfront, the impacts are really related to the ocean. And so sea level rise, this past storm and swell kind of mimicked what would occur in sea level rise. Again, the rain event wasn't necessarily an issue at the waterfront or harbor. It really didn't cause any issues at all down there. It was really the swell inundation. And so that was exacerbated by high tides and high tides becoming more extreme. And so this was sort of a little bit of an insight into what would happen as sea level rises.
Okay. And then who built, you said the new revetment and the old revetment. Did we build the old revetment? Was that a waterfront department project?
Commissioner Nelson, I don't have an answer to that.
Or was that a project that was
I've
done
historically
by
heard-
the yacht club?
I've historically heard that it went in the 80s after the large 80s storm, because there was no rock revetment there, and there was a lot of inundation right under the yacht club and all the way out to the Coast Guard building and through all the harbor buildings. And then from what I know is that prompted the installation of that rock wall.
Right, because what I'm trying to do is figure out, I know in your leases, there's insurance requirements. And what type of events do the insurance requirements in our leases address? So, for example, when you say we want $1 million per occurrence or whatever, what's that for? Could the insurance proceeds, should the insurance proceeds that are available as a result of the lease, could they be applied to the cost at some later date?
Yeah, also,
Or no?
also a good question. I know that the yacht club themselves are pursuing their insurance, seemingly not very fruitfully at this point. Harbor Marine Works is pursuing their insurance, and we, the city, are insured as well.
Right.
And so we're pursuing our insurance. Frustratingly, it seems that the first response from the insurers are that, unfortunately, you're not insured for this particular event. So we're early enough on that we're going down all of those roads. So all of those entities are working with their insurance companies right now.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Cohen?
Yeah, there was a lot of talk about disaster funds, and it sounds like everybody here would really like to see if there's a possibility that we could have some of those funds, be they state or federal. I have no idea what that process would look like, and if you handle that process, or if you would need some advocacy from us here, or if we should be reaching out to city council to see if they're reaching out to the right, politicians or representatives to see if there's going to be a fund package that we're included in it. Could you shed any light on that? And then if there is an opportunity for us to help or advocate there, please let us know.
Yeah, Commissioner Cohen, well, thank you. Thank you for offering your support. And at this stage, no, I don't know. We're learning that as well as the waterfront department and where to go. A lot of these processes change, but even between large events like this. And so when we went through it in the Thomas Fire, it may be different now. And so we're still early on, but I appreciate your support, and I assume the whole Harbor Commission's support, that if there's anything we can utilize your influence for, that will definitely come in handy. At some point, there's going to be decisions made on what funding is prioritized and where it goes, and obviously us will push for the waterfront to be reimbursed for that, for the level of work that we put back in, and so we'll keep you posted.
Yeah, I think that if any of us have been through a process where they're looking at packages or any sort of legislation, you really want to make sure that you have advocates that are letting everyone know that, there's a need. So I don't know, I think maybe something to city council to let them know that there's a need here might be a good idea.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Commissioner Cohen. There's a lot of needs citywide too, so I just want to make sure that we're coordinating with our other departments and other boards and commissions, and that we're not kind of picking a racehorse. And so, but we'll be sure to consolidate with them and coordinate and work together. So, thank you.
Actually, Commissioner, unless you had a direct question. Okay. Commissioner McCray?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that really, in a larger picture of Santa Barbara Harbor scene, this is not our first rodeo. As you pointed out, Director, the 1983 storms really tore things up quite a bit as well, and that's how that first set of rock revetment actually ended up underneath and behind the yacht club facility, which is on pilings standing out in the sand and the water right now. And they had similar damage at that time as well. I want to point out the capital reserves are really key and they're really needed. And it's really fortunate that we have those available right now. And it's important that we protect those funds for exactly this type of occurrence. So we should always be vigilant as to where those funds go and make sure that we have adequate funding to be able to do projects like this and repair damage as it does occur in instances where we do have some heavy storms. I know that was a pretty scary picture that we saw of all the sand gone. I want to reassure folks that that is not permanent. That sand will actually come back. We did a scientific project off Los Flores where we had gear on the bottom and it went for several seasons. During the winter months, our gear got covered up by several feet of sand and 40 to 60 feet of water. And then it was magically unburied and the beach built back out. Sand continues to come down from our front country to the west and then make its way down through along the coastline through littoral drift. And not only that, all the material that comes out of the storm basins and ends up on Goleta Beach actually is the same material that we end up, a lot of it, not the big stuff, pumping back out of the sandbar and kicking it on its merry way down the beach to the east. So the sand will be back.
Thanks, Merritt. Commissioner Nelson.
Believe it or not, I found the city's 2013, I guess you call it the emergency preparedness plan. And the harbor was mentioned in that. And so when you say we're trying to figure it out, I guess I would think that the emergency plan, which deals with things like hazard mitigation, that hazard mitigation ought to include our projects. That if the sea level rise is the accurate document and it's predicting this sort of impact that we're going to have every year, then shouldn't the hazard mitigation component of the city's emergency plan include the harbor and the waterfront? I'm assuming their hazard mitigation plans protects roads, protects airports. And so my question is, does it or should it protect us? I mean, as opposed to us dealing with it in our little silo as an enterprise division, this is part of the city. And the city has these vulnerabilities, these threat areas, and one of them is the waterfront. And they need to budget, they need to think about how we're going to deal with each of these major areas. And I would assume that the emergency management plan would do that. But if it's sort of a black box where we don't even get into it until called upon, I worry about that. and we get back to Suzanne's point, that if we don't make some noise about that, then we'll take whatever we get. And as Merritt just said, we want to hold on and we want to protect our reserves. But if the city is planning on protecting, parks and planning on protecting airports and all of that, I would hope the commission would want us to be part of a citywide protection program. And if we've got to make a lot of noise to do that, we should. So maybe we get the emergency management folks in here. I mean, you talked about the woman who's the administrator of that program. Maybe we get her in here, talk to us, to start the drumbeat, if you will. So for example, are you the point of contact in an emergency? I know there's an emergency operations center, in the county somewhere, and somebody from UCSB goes there, and somebody from the county goes there, and then there are individuals that get called on. So did you or Brian or anybody else are part of that environmental operations center and how the city is dealing with this? I don't know.
Is that your, Commissioner Nelson, is your question, were we involved in the Emergency Operations Center?
Yeah.
Yes, I spent several hours there through the event. Eric Engbritson spent several hours there through the event, so there's representation from all departments. That's a very operational.
Right.
It's kind of dealing with prioritizing things as they're coming in.
And in that plan that sets up who's in the EOC, there's also discussion about recovery, and there's discussion about readiness. They go into all the things you would expect them to go into to prepare for this. And so what you're saying is this is going to be an annual event and pick up the sea level rise report, and that's all you need to know. But it sounds like our reserve is going to be under attack, Merritt, on a regular basis.
Just so long as others don't take it from us, I think we've been doing just fine.
Okay, all right. Okay. I just think we ought to know where we are in the emergency management. As the city discusses emergency management, preparing for it, finding the funds for recovery, I think we ought to be part of that discussion and dialogue. That's all I'm saying.
The triage.
Yeah, so.
Commissioner Cohen?
I guess, one of the things too that would be good to know in this conversation is how much money we're talking about. And I know that, Caesar pointed out that we don't really know right now. We're going to see what the impact is on our reserves and on our budget. But if it's going to be significant, then yes, we want to make sure that we get that, replenished so that we don't have another issue, and then all of a sudden we have no reserves. So that's one thing that I'll look forward to finding out is, what is the fiscal impact of this event? And then we can, figure out if we need to do more.
Yeah, and we're very much still in it. I think we're all aligned. No part of myself or waterfront staff don't want to go after as much, recoup as much money as we want. And just to clarify, I think we might be conflating two issues. So we're really talking about an emergency response plan in the moment of an emergency, and then we're also sort of drifting into the talk of large-scale capital spending preparing for an emergency.
Correct.
So I brought up the sea level rise adaptation plan to Commissioner Hanrahan under the discussion of where is the city going 10, 20, 30, 50 years from now. That's what that plan lays out. It's no surprise that the city, the waterfront, we're underfunded for all of this. I mean, even today, the city's CIP program went to Planning Commission. We have $50 million of waterfront projects that could and would be completed right now if we could. Deferred maintenance, dock repairs, all of this. Sea level rise adds an enormous component of that. So saying we need to find a way to fund coastal armoring, retreat, whatever that may look like, that's a big ask, and the city is grappling with that right now. So I don't want to conflate our emergency response plan as a city and an organization with our planning documents to how are we going to fund the hundreds of millions of dollars of things that may happen in the future. And so those are really two different things. And so just wanted to clarify that.
Well, I don't know. I just think hazard mitigation is what, I guess, when I looked at their plan, and I didn't read it, it was 359 pages. But when I looked at the table of contents, it dealt with things like hazard mitigation. It dealt with things like recovery after an emergency, not just the cost of things on the ground while they're happening. It was, basically dealing with emergencies when they happen is not enough. That you got to plan for them. And all I'm saying is that, we ought to know what that plan is and how that plan affects us. That's all.
We'd be happy to provide you a copy of the city's emergency response
I
plan.
know you would. I've got a copy of it. But I want to know where we are in it. Is the harbor and the waterfront? I mean, the waterfront's probably one of the most significant economic resources that the city actually owns and controls. And I think that, if they're doing major capital planning for target areas as part of their planning process, we need to be in that. And I'm not convinced by what your answers that we are. So, Mr. Chairman, I just would love to see us get a better understanding of the emergency services plan and, what role the waterfront department has in that plan, both in terms of operations or the response to the event, but also in terms of addressing hazard mitigation and recovery and planning for the future. Readiness, I guess.
And I think that's an excellent point to take up at our planning and agenda session.
Okay.
I think we can build that out,
Okay,
right?
that's great.
Right. Generally, I think people would agree with that.
Yep, I would agree with that.
Excellent, excellent. So we can expand that. Commissioner Cohen?
No, I'm sorry. It just didn't clear me.
Okay. Commissioner McCray?
Yeah, I just want to expand on what Director Wiltshire just mentioned. These really are two different things, and having those capital reserves in hand to be able to do the work tomorrow is key. So no matter how we attempt to address the bigger picture in the longer term, having those capital reserves robust is very, very important. We need to be able to hire contracts tomorrow to come out and fix what happened yesterday and try to figure out how to fix a bigger financial picture in the future. But the capital reserves are key for us to keep intact at the harbor so that we don't end up with parking lots washing away because we couldn't find a contractor that would go on a promise. Thank you.
Vice Chair?
No, I definitely agree with Commissioner McCray on the capital reserves. And I believe this is technically why they exist, right? This is actually part of 1740 of the Santa Barbara Municipal Code. But I'm just also wondering as well, I mean, we had a period during 2020, obviously, where we needed to access reserves. How easily available are they? Is there a process where we have to submit something to get these reserves? Or is it, is it easy enough to get these reserves to pay for something as it is coming from like our revenue that year? Just curious, what was the process of accessing these significant funds that we have?
Yeah, great question, Commissioner Stanwyck. The reserves are part of our fund, so they're part of the waterfront fund. As with any budget action, they're typically brought to Harbor Commission and to Council. In an emergency, we have a little bit of authority to issue emergency purchase orders to contractors to get work done in real time. What that will look like is citywide, we'll be taking that back to boards and commissions, taking that back to council to inform them of decisions that were made and dollars that were spent. If funds need to be transferred from reserves to an operating budget, that's a council action. So we'd put together a staff report, bring it to Harbor Commission and say, we need to transfer X amount of dollars from our harbor preservation reserve as a result of this to bolster this contract because of this. And so that would be an action that would come to Harbor Commission and ultimately be approved by council.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay. Doesn't look like there's any further commissioners that have their hands raised. Do you want to go to the next item? Director Wiltshire?
Yeah, Chair Stebbin, that'd be great. If there's no public comment on this particular item.
I don't have any hands raised or speaker slips at this time.
Good evening, Chair Stedman, Commissioners.
Thank you.
Eric Ingebretson, Waterfront Harbor Operations Manager, and going to give you guys a brief report, maybe not that brief, on just the operations over the last 2 weeks. And with that, we'll get going. So our recent storm event update, just for folks to know, between the 5th and 9th, we did experience significant swell, along with some pretty outstanding rain totals in a short period of time. For example, we had almost, actually over 12 inches of rain up off San Marcos Pass. And the swells, where it really affected us is that we were in a spring tide cycle. We had high highs and low lows. We really appreciate the low lows during those swells, but the high highs can give us some challenges. To give you a little more information there, during the storm, that the Waterfront, Department of Facilities Yard, Yacht Club, Marine Works, all of these areas were impacted. Director Wiltshire already kind of went through them, but I will go through them again really briefly. Sediment movement in the harbor was very substantial, along with our littoral current combined with a strong westerly swell. We had about 50,000 cubic yards move into the waterfront area. That's equivalent to about 500 dump trucks of sand, just to give you an idea of what that would look like. Again, most significant impacts for the waterfront were due to swell, not rain. Here you can see at Stearns Wharf, the Seaward Finger. Harbor Patrol did deem that an emergency closure. You can see some tape and barricades there. Unfortunately, they couldn't staff that area. They had to leave on boats going aground, checking on boats in the harbor and other public safety issues. And as soon as officials leave, folks sort of ignore the closure signs and go around barricades, and we're just really thankful nobody got hurt here. But I do want to echo Chief Males and our Chief of Police on how important it is for the public, Kelly Gordon, how important it is for folks to just not do things like this. Don't go around barricades, don't go through this. We were lucky, nobody was hurt, but it could have been very serious here in this picture. Again, Stearns Wharf did relatively well. There was some damage. Again, the heavy surf combined with the longshore drift dislodged 8 piles from the wharf. Many of those piles were previously identified as to be replaced. So Mother Nature helped us out a little bit. Again, some minor utilities under the wharf, but some of these bigger piles, we do have a contract in place, and they will be replaced. Don't worry, the wharf is structurally sound right now. You can go out there and shop and fish, and anything that you'd like to do. The next pile contract is, the bidding process is in the works, and the contract and start of that should be in April. Again, just going over some of the information that Director Wiltshire already discussed. Our impacted area for the Yacht Club, Harbor Marine Works, and again, the Waterfront Yard. You can see there in the foreground, Harbor Marine Works, and then again, the Yacht Club parking lot that had the small boats that were all moved in anticipation for the storm. And the yacht club. So the utilities beneath the yacht club did sustain pretty moderate or severe damage with sewage, electrical, and the HVAC. That building was yellow tagged. So we can't have anybody in the building until they get those repairs fixed. But we were actually pretty lucky, nothing like the storm of 82 and 83. There was no interior flooding, and the yacht club's currently under repairs. Again, here's an aerial view of just off of the facilities yard with what used to be our winter berm right in this area. And that disappeared, as Director Wilshire mentioned, within 12 hours. Again, another area, I had a lot of folks asking me about the K-rails. You can see one here, kind of in the surf line, that K-rails were swept out to sea. That's not exactly what happens with K-rails. They were all retrieved, and we're currently using those with Cushman Construction, who has the contract for the repairs to the yard in the yacht club. Again, Mike had already gone through this, but we did obtain emergency coastal development permit and with the Coastal Commission and the Army Corps. The work began within 24 hours, so this was done overnight for the most part, and really want to thank our colleagues at Public Works that helped us get these permits in place. They did a fantastic job, and a lot of folks have reached out and said they couldn't believe how quick we were on that, with especially getting the revetment project going. And if you're curious to where some of that rock came from, that's for the quarry up in Cambria. Thank you. Cambria, so that's where that rock's coming from. Beach vessels. As with a lot of storms, we always have beach vessels. This particular boat did beach on city property, and that's when the swell was predominantly out of the east. That was pre the storm. So this vessel washed up on the beach. We contracted with Marburg. It was cleaned off the beach within 4 hours, and the costs involved there, those are all recouped and fall under the SAVE program. There were 3 other boats that were reported on the beaches in county waters. Still out looking for them. We don't know how far down the coast they are at this time. Sheriff's Department is aware of those boats. Our federal aids to navigation. We don't normally see our number 6 buoy up Sycamore Creek. Yeah, some kayakers came down and made some funny jokes about a buoy up a creek. But anyways, we are working with the Coast Guard, and the ATON team will come out as soon as we have finished, completed our dredging. So conditions of the harbor. As mentioned, large westerly swell intensified the longshore drift. It created heavy shoaling, as mentioned, in 2 days. The contractor's estimating over 50,000 cubic feet of sand moved into the federal channel. And just a quick note, looking at this picture, a lot of folks have said to me, is that oil? It is not. That is just sediment. So no petroleum product involved here. This is just all organic material, mostly from probably Mission Creek, as you can see in the foreground, emptying out. So where we are with dredging, a lot of folks don't know, but the dredging of the federal channel is managed by the Army Corps of Engineers, and that comes at a cost of about $3 million per year. The equipment is not owned or operated by the city or the waterfront. It's a private contractor that owns that equipment. They are based, the equipment you see here could be in San Diego in 2 days and could be up in the Delta a week later doing work. So we don't always have the dredge here in the harbor. Currently, we were in between contracts with the Army Corps and actively in the bid process year that we were in the process at the end of a 3-year contract.
Can we, may we pause for a moment?
Sure.
We have a question from
Oh,
Commissioner.
go ahead, let him finish his
Are you sure?
presentation, yeah.
Okay. Sorry, Eric. You, go right ahead. You were,
Please
you
finish your
were,
presentation.
Oh, okay.
We'll catch it at the end, thank you.
Great. We'll
conclusion
move
of the
on.
project.
Okay. So now we're, even though we're in a bid cycle with the contractor, we do have an emergency dredge bid, and that was awarded. That will remove approximately 30,000 cubic yards. The dredge company is currently on site. They are mobilizing their pipe. And the dredge is being towed to the harbor. I believe it should arrive tonight or tomorrow. They will hook that dredge up to kind of like a big electrical extension cord. It is an electric dredge, and should start pumping sand by Monday. And we plan to have most of the channel, or a large part of the channel, cleared by Friday of next week. So initial damage assessments, Mike, or Director Wilshire spoke about this. When we were at the OEC, these forms are distributed throughout the city and through the different departments. And they're kind of a living document. It moves around, costs are increased and they decrease. But where we are right now with estimated funds for these projects, including dredging of the harbor, and that would be ancillary dredging, not federal dredging. You can see that the number there under category D is 750,000. We have plugged that in there just because of levees, dams, and channels. That is what we're predicting it would cost to dredge inside the harbor that is not covered by the federal government. I believe Mike, or Director Wilshire, spoke about the other debris removals, emergency protective measures, which would be the rock revetment project, and then public buildings and equipment. We don't know for sure exactly what extent we are with some damages to some of the buildings, including Stearns Wharf. Bottom line, we have an estimate in that will be submitted to our emergency services manager, who will then move that on up to OEM, Office of Emergency Services. And we're right now sitting at about $2.75 million. What else can I add here? We did have a visit from FEMA 2 days ago. So this, they came down and assessed. They will look at these numbers to probably ask more information, especially on the dredging inside the harbor. But we will move forward from there. And in conclusion, we just want to just thank everybody involved here, including the Harbor Patrol, our facilities, parking staff, all the folks that came into work, worked overtime, took call, just did a fantastic job. And then again, support from Public Works that helped us with so many great things, and the fire department and the police department. They had a lot on their table too, but they were always willing to help with anything we needed. Great that we didn't have any reported injuries or death. And as mentioned, the cleanup and repair being funded by the Waterfront Department right now, we look to go to the federal government for reimbursement on the approximately 2.7 from that previous slide. And I think that concludes my report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right. I have a comment, several comments followed by a question. First of all, I was headed out on December 28th, and I saw the sand was stacked up high on the beach with the green buoy at the end of the sandbar sitting sideways. Its anchor clearly buried many feet deep under sand. It was just perched and ready to come into the harbor at that point. So I sent a photo off and to one of our harbor tenants to get the word out to everybody that had larger boats to, this is something that's going to happen in the next month or two. It needed to be addressed. It appeared that we had not gotten our regular fall dredging. Typically, I'm used to seeing the dredging occur both in the fall and then in the spring. And this is not, like the Coast Guard's regulations are written in blood, this is not something that people came up with as a hypothetical, well, we should do it in the fall and in the spring. This is learned from hard experience. We have had this harbor close up before, completely, partially. This is one of those lessons that is learned by experience. Unfortunately, the first big storm of the year happened, as you mentioned, January 6th, right on top of the full moon. And not the king tide, but the king tides are right on the new moon, like right this evening. Sandbar was breaking clear across, and little waves were lapping across the front of the harbor as I looked at the video camera at Santa Barbara Landing. Clear across the entrance, you could have probably waited down there and not gotten your kneecaps, what it looked like to me. Maybe that's an error, but it was pretty low tide. On January 8th, I was running a collecting trip for the university to go get some rockfish for the parasitology lab, and I looked, and sure enough, that swell had knocked a lot of that sand down. Just the wood was sticking out of where the sandbar was, and there was not 12 feet of water in the deepest part of the channel. So that was January 8th, and we've had several more storms since. On January 10th, the Condor Express snuck out of the harbor at high tide and went to the boatyard. Since then, there have been no whale watching trips out of Santa Barbara Landing. I understand the Allen-T tried to come in and folded a prop on the sandbar, so that kind of ended. All the big boat trips have been canceled since about the 10th. And I really want to offer a lot of kudos to Eric. It is not in your job description to do anything with respect to the sandbar and dredging. But you do hold the vast majority of institutional knowledge still within harbor staff. And just good on you and good on your staff for stepping up to the plate and starting to manage this. With that in mind, I went and looked to see whose job it actually was to make sure that our dredging got done on a timely fashion. And the first thing I found was that the harbor's facilities manager's job description includes essential functions, and there are several of them numbered. 2, conducts weekly meetings with the waterfront director to review key projects, budget needs, and sufficient staffing needs related to the construction and maintenance activities. Pretty clear. 6, acts as liaison with the Army Corps of Engineers, ACE, regarding annual dredging of the federal channel and attends weekly meetings with the Corps representatives and Corps contractors. 7, oversees waterfront sediment management program, the SMP, including preparation of project descriptions and securing permits, coordinates sediment sampling and surveys and environmental monitoring projects. So that's one set. And then I looked further, and let's see here if I can scroll down to it far enough. You guys have a lot on your plate, let me tell you. So for the waterfront director, he has a similar list. The 10th item on his list is provides policy oversight and program direction regarding annual maintenance dredging of harbor's main channel and other areas. Works with Corps of Engineers, staff, and dredge contractor to assure timely and cost-effective delivery of services, including the presentation of annual federal request for dredging funds. In consulting with city's federal lobbyists and the Corps of Engineers representatives. And then I looked at Eric's job description, and there's nothing, absolutely nothing about having to deal with the dredging and harbor entrance, except for maybe policing speed limits and so forth. Really, thank you very much for stepping up and using your expertise. And you guys really work as a team in this, trying to make sure it got done. My question is, why didn't we get the fall dredging done?
Chair Stedman, Commissioner McCray, it's not the same playing field we used to have. You and I have been here for a long time. We've been through this before. The Army Corps has a lot of steps that they have to step through to get their permitting done. One of the larger hurdles is our environmental assessment. That holds everything back. Where we should historically have been dredging in November, this cog in the wheel moved at a pace that didn't allow that. It slowed down. So that's what I can tell you is where we're at right now. And working with the Army Corps, especially with the emergency dredging, once it was pointed out and they were made aware of it, we got funds for that immediately. Again, just institutional knowledge. Mike, our Director Wilshire, Brian, they know that I've been through this before, thought it was a good time for me to step up to the plate for the emergency dredging, but don't worry. Brian and Darrell will be back doing permitting and working with the dredge company for our bid cycle.
Once again, thank you very much for bringing your knowledge to bear and literally digging us out of this situation. And I sure hope it goes as you mentioned, that we are back to business in the Santa Barbara Harbor within a week or two.
Well, thank you very much. And if you may argue this with me, Commissioner McCray, but with that sand movement, when it came in during the easterly, several folks said this could have been a blessing because with the easterly coming in and those waves breaking in that area actually absorbed the energy and didn't allow a lot of that energy into the harbor. So that's just another thing to look at. If the dredge had been here, I mean, we could point fingers and say, what if, all night long. But I did meet with the contractor today, and he was really worried about that dredge pipe in heavy surf, moving around, people looky-loos going around barricades, and the last thing we want is having somebody get hurt trying to check out a dredge pipe that's sloshing around the surf. So sure, there's other things going on as well. So thank you very much.
Are there any hands raised from the public?
We do have one hand at this time.
Are you, Manager Ingebretson, are you done with the formal part of your report?
I have concluded my report.
Okay, with that.
Ms. Jamie Dimond, I'm going to allow you to speak, and you'll have 2 minutes. Give me 1 moment to get the timer going. Okay, whenever you're ready, I'll start the timer.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Jamie. I am Jamie Dimond, manager of Santa Barbara Landing and owner of Stardust Sport Fishing. I also would like to commend Mr. Ingebretson for the work that he's done getting the emergency dredging going and his liaising with everybody, and also with those of us that are stakeholders and some of the larger users of the harbor. I really appreciate the fact that he's checked in with me along the way to let me know status updates. I am frustrated though, because this could have been avoided. The same thing happened last year, and this has happened in years past. And I think it's really important for everybody to understand that there is no recourse for our types of businesses. There is no business loss insurance for vessels other than if the hull itself is damaged. I've looked into this extensively. I got into this years ago when the harbor was closed for almost a month in March during the rockfish season opener with a previous waterfront manager. And we went round and round, and there is no way for businesses, for boat-based businesses, to recapture lost revenue when this happens. We are completely on our own with no aid. And it's really important to understand that this is our leanest time of year as it is, and a handful of trips will make it or break it. We can't do any whale watching. We have floating marine labs in partnership with the Maritime Museum scheduled to start next week. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to get those going. And it's really frustrating to see history repeat itself, especially when, you know, there was no fall cycle. And like Commissioner McCray said, this is something that happens for a reason, not just because people thought it felt like the right time to do it or it fit well with their own schedule. There's a purpose and a reason for it. And I really hope we take a moment for lessons learned and not repeat the mistakes of the past moving forward. Thank you.
And there are no additional hands raised at this time.
Okay, and I don't think any of the commissioners have any. Commissioner Nelson, can you speak into your mic?
I'm trying to.
Help them out there, Commissioner Hanrahan.
I'm trying to learn about weather. I mean, my approach to this is how can we prevent this again? The harbor is this big economic engine in this community, and basically it got shut down. The engine got shut down because the channel filled in. And what can we do to stop it from happening again? And I think that's sort of what Jamie was saying. But when I see in bold letters at the bottom of a slide, it wasn't the rain, it was the swell. What am I supposed to take from that? That the swell was the culprit here that prevented our normal cycles of dredging from working? And that's the problem? That it wasn't the cyclone bomb and it wasn't the atmospheric rivers, that's all about rain. But the swell should be dealt with separately, and that was a historical high, and as a consequence, our main channel into the harbor and all the businesses that function as a result of that were shut down. That's a huge economic disruption. So are we blaming it on the swell, not the rain, not the storm? I thought the swell was part of the overall storm event, and that we and the city haven't done a great job of preparing ourselves for that storm event. Agree completely with what Merritt's saying, is that it's not the first rodeo. And if it's not the first rodeo, we jump on the bull a different way next year. And I'm trying to figure out how we address that. But when I see things on the slide that says it's not the rain, it was the swell, I think we're trying to say that there was something unique and different about this event. Is that the reason why you're informing me about the swell as opposed to the rain? Was the swell the big factor here? And no one could predict the swell, even though we knew a month ago that there was all these storms headed towards the Central Coast, and a parade was the word I saw, a parade of cyclone bombs. And I'm thinking, my gosh, that's pretty serious. But now I realize it wasn't the cyclone bombs, it wasn't the atmospheric rivers, it was the swell. So maybe you can help explain to me why it was the significance of the swell as opposed to rain and the cyclone bombs. So now, because I'm thinking, I got it all wrong. the reason the harbor was closed up is because of the swell, not because, then all this damage is because of the swell, not because of these atmospheric rivers and cyclone bombs that hit the place and just, blew up Capitola. I'm struggling here for a better understanding of the root cause. And what I'm getting is that it's all about the swell.
Chair Stedman, Commissioner Nelson, well, yes, you're right. It's the swell. For us, it's the swell. It's longshore transport combined with the swell and the way our harbor was constructed. It has always sanded in. It's always been a problem. Something we've dealt with. Well, I moved here in '82, so I got to experience the '83 storms. Yeah, it's for us predominantly, yes, the swell.
So it really had
Cyclone
nothing to do-
bombs and those affect other areas, other communities, farms. The city itself has had to deal with flooding. We have a pretty great area for stuff to empty out of our rivers into the ocean, so we get very little flooding in the harbor. Occasionally, we get some drains that fill with seaweed, but we have folks that are facilities folks that kept those clear, so we had very minimal amounts of flooding from the rain or cyclone bomb. But the swell is significant for any harbor. We're not immune to that. So combined with the swell and the longshore transport, that's significant, and that moves a significant amount of sand, and that's
And
where
that had
we're at.
nothing to do with our dredging cycles. And when we dredged and when we didn't dredge and what was awarded the way it used to be and all that had nothing to do with it. You're saying that it was the swell. And the swell basically,
Well, to answer that question,
yeah, sure.
we had a survey done before the storms, and predicting swell and weather isn't an exact science. I mean, we can get it, and I believe Commissioner McCray would agree, within 10 to 15 days, we can get it pretty good. But when we have surveys done October, November, and our harbor looks great, we're going, okay, we know that we're being held up with some environmental issues that the Army Corps is dealing with, but right now, when we had those surveys, this wasn't an issue.
Okay.
The issue became once we had this
You had the swell.
significant swell.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And just to tack onto that, I can understand the frustration, and there was a little bit of bad luck in the fact that the Army Corps' 3-year dredge cycle, this happened to be a year where they were rebidding that, and so that is a bit of bad luck on our part. I don't know if that fall cycle had have occurred, if with the amount of swell activity, if there still would have been this much sand and sediment moving in.
Sure.
One thing that we can't do, that the Army Corps is not contracted to do, is preemptively dredge off the sand spit. They are very prescribed of the federal channel, and so we all know where the sand comes from. It comes from the sand spit, it ends up in the harbor. They can't go outside of their federal channel, so they can only dredge as much as they can dredge within that federal channel. As far as protecting this in the future, there is a system in place that we adhere to with the Army Corps. If we want to become a harbor that has boutique service, dredging on demand, that comes with an enormous cost. And so if we want to be that harbor, that is a change in operation.
Right.
So we make operational decisions that, hey, this is a once in a 20-year thing, once in a 30-year thing. How much money do we spend real time to prevent it? And so if we want to become a harbor that has a living dredge in the harbor that's on demand anytime we need it, we can become that, but it's going to cost a heck of a lot of money. We can choose to pay for that ourselves. We can lobby the Army Corps, lobby the federal government for that more. So there is paths forward, but it's sort of this balance of how much of our budget do we want to spend right now to have boutique dredging services.
So with the boutique, I mean, I guess you talked about the reserve, and everybody seemed to think that the reserve is the way the reserve is the way we protect ourselves. And it's great that the reserves are strong enough to deal with this when it happens. Would boutique services be something that the reserve should actually deal with? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm trying to figure out what do we do differently as a result of this, and recognize that we may have another year when the swells are historic.
No, it's a good question. It's a budgeting question, and we're going to be bringing our budget to the Harbor Commission soon, and it would be an interesting thought to say, hey, should we carve out an additional $1 million to put towards a dredge that we can't do anything else with? So it becomes real questions and really where we decide to utilize those dollars, so.
Right. When I saw the $2.7 million, I know it's an estimate and you don't have all the numbers yet, but a $2.7 million impact. Is that impact to your budget, or is part of that $2.7 million part of what we anticipate the federal government covering? Or is that separate and apart from the federal dredging project? So we are already estimating a $2.7 million impact. Are we? I mean, is that clean of the federal dredging, that $2.7 million estimate?
Yeah, Commissioner Nelson, that does not include the federal dredging component. And what that form was kind of a snapshot to take a glimpse into our process. So that is an initial damage assessment, estimates of what we think we could potentially spend by the end of this.
Right.
So that's updating almost daily as we get contractors on board, as things become more clear. And so, but that is our initial damage estimate, and that is the exact form that we would submit to the federal government for reimbursement.
Okay, okay.
Vice Chair?
Yes, I mean, it's a shame that businesses are closed because of the channel, but I think we're doing a great job of rectifying the situation. But, like every event in life, I feel like we can gain knowledge and experiences from this. And, I mean, I know you said about we could have a possible dredge here, that's a solution, but I mean, is there anything that we've learned from this, or going forward we could do to be proactive about preventing a close of the channel, or anything that could have happened differently that we can learn from the situation?
Yeah, Commissioner Stanwyck and Chair Stedman, going back to Commissioner McCrae's discussion on our job duties and all of that, that happens. And so we have copious records of Brian and myself, Eric and myself, talking about dredge all fall, working with the Army Corps. We spend $30,000 a year on lobbying services just to make sure we stay relevant and are on the radar of the federal government so they don't forget that $3 million that they give to Santa Barbara. This is a presidential maintenance budget that's $3 to $4 billion. So our portion of it that the Army executes is absolutely minuscule, but we really do what we can to try and continue those funds coming through. This is a learning experience for me. We've always been in contact with the Army Corps, and they've always said if there is a situation where the harbor mouth closes between dredging cycles, if there's a big enough storm event, we will be available for emergency dredging. So for me, this is them kind of putting their money where their mouth is. Like this is action happening. I realize that for the last 2 weeks, ocean conditions, weather conditions have been horrendous. The idea of getting a dredge up from San Diego last week would be, I wouldn't even think it would be safe. And so I get that a week or two, I understand the frustration, but this is essentially where what the agreement was with the Army Corps. If the mouth were to close off, they would provide emergency dredging services. And they are doing that in the grand scheme of things, somewhat short order. I don't know of a situation that we could have got that dredge here sooner, even if it was, you couldn't bring it here during the storm. And so, other than having it physically here, and it's not our equipment, we're not contracted to have it here. So, but you're right, it is something to learn from. But for me, I'm really optimistic, and I'm happy that the Army Corps was there and that they are providing this emergency dredging service.
Great. Yeah, and also, I mean, I just want to thank, the waterfront for doing the quick cleanup, and also really, especially the communication. So thank you to Mr. Engelbrecht for sending out the emails, because as a slip holder, I received those emails, and I just know the community has really received those well, because we're really just a bunch of people just gossiping, trying to figure out what's going on. And this person saw something and this person heard something, but we have been receiving those emails regarding communication of what's going on, and they've been very reassuring to all of us. So thanks for sending those.
All right. Are there any other questions from the commission? Any more comments? Brian, do you want to say anything? No? Maybe you've learned a couple of things in the last week or two.
Yeah, as you guys had mentioned, the Waterfront Facilities Department, so the Waterfront Department overall, we work very well as a team. So we conquered and divide and conquered, you might say. So we did a really good job. And I just want to give Eric recognition. Back in last summer, he was ringing a bell about preparing and talking to the Corps of Engineers. He encouraged me to reach out to them. So we were talking to them on a monthly basis and trying to get information. But they had to go through a 8-month process for environmental assessment. And there was a couple snags in that process, which put them behind like a month, month and a half. But their wheels were turning. And they're, like Mike said, we need them during emergency. They picked up their boots and they were on their way. So it was really nice that they participated as a team. But I'm very grateful for the federal government and the U.S. Corps of Engineers to be so supportive to our community. So there's only so much horsewhipping we can do to get them to do something different. But of course, now that we've lived through this, I'll try to get them to dredge more earlier in the fall. It's been creeping. It was November, late November, early December, late December, January. So it's kind of creeping, but there is no perfect science, as we said, what works, what won't work. If we dredge too early, then we might have a closure before the April dredge. So we only have so much money to spend, and we have to be wise with that money. Thank you.
Very well, thanks. Thank you very much. Any other comments? Anything else, Director Wiltshire?
No, Chair, not on that item.
Okay. All right, so it's commission and staff communications. If anybody, traditionally, Commissioner Cohen, at this point in the meeting, you know, if someone wants to promote the date for their subcommittee or any other special event, now's the time to do that. So Commissioner Hanrahan, do you? and usually Commissioner Hanrahan has something. So
Thank you, Chair. Yes, in fact, I will. I'll promote our next cruise ship subcommittee meeting again, February 22nd at 12 p.m. in the Waterfront Classroom. That's February 22nd, 12 p.m. at the Waterfront Classroom for the cruise ship subcommittee meeting. Thank you.
excellent. Commissioner Nelson? I guess we have some pending dates, right? Requests for subcommittee meetings.
Yep. And Chair Stedman, Commissioners, just one reminder, we are trying something new. So next week on Tuesday at 5 p.m., we have our Harbor Commission Priority Setting Workshop. It'll be at 5 p.m. in the Waterfront Classroom, so down at the harbor. The way we're setting it up, in-person participation is hugely preferred. So again, just a reminder that that's happening next week.
Is there, should the commissioners be loading apps on their phones?
So I'll send an email out to you guys to let you know, but it would be helpful if you bring a smartphone or some sort of electronic device. That way you can participate in it's called Mentimeter, what we'll be using.
In the polling?
Yeah, for the polling.
Yeah, Chair and Commissioner, you really just need anything that can go on the internet. It's just like a website-based thing. So if you have a smartphone, that's plenty.
Yeah.
Cool.
I'll make sure to send an email to kind of go over that and
Yeah, send
make
that
you all
out.
aware.
All right. Anything else? No hands raised? Yes.
There we go. I just didn't know how the commission committee assignments work, if that's something that will be addressed at the workshop, or that's my question.
Yeah, Commissioner Cohen, great question. We held off this go-around. We'll discuss it at the priority setting workshop, By then, I'm sure you'll be a veteran, and then so at the February meeting, we will kind of look at our existing subcommittees and give the Harbor Commission a chance to either move people around or fill spots where there's vacancies. So the action will happen at the February meeting, but we'll make sure we get you the information you need prior to that meeting.
Yeah, that's definitely on the radar. Okay. If there are no further proceedings from any part of this public meeting, then we'll entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
A second?
I'll second.
All right, Angela?
Commissioner Cohen?
Agree.
Commissioner Hanrahan?
Yes.
Commissioner McCray?
Yes.
Commissioner Nelson?
Yes.
Commissioner Stanwyck?
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson?
Yes.
Chair Stedman?
Yes.
That's unanimous. Meeting's adjourned.